Persephone stood on the deck of the Bothia and stared with baleful eyes at the island realm. There were limits to the amount of infidelity and humiliation one could be expected to bear. Hades had one more conquest to add to his list of infidelities. Admittedly, her husband was not as unfaithful a spouse as her father, but it was still too much. Her daughters were waiting to join their powers with hers, each on their own boat, Alecto in the north, Megara in the west, and Tisiphone in the south. It was almost poetic, the Erinyes, endless anger, jealous rage, and vengeful destruction, each named for a member of the unholy trinity of retribution. They would lend her their strength, for they too had been offended by their father's betrayal. Hades slept, his arms around a beautiful young maiden, barely a woman. He had taught her the art of lovemaking, and she had been an adept student. They were lying on a bed of pillows, in a small house, not far from the temple of Poseidon. Persephone imagined Hades' hands upon his mistress' flesh and her blood began to boil. She howled and the sea around the island city seethed and churned. It did not matter to her who had been seduced and who had done the seducing. She raised her arms and the wind rose, whipping the waves to greater heights. Each forbidden caress Persephone's mind conjured up drove the water into a frenzied assault. With a shuddering wail, she hurled the rising sea at her husband's love nest. People screamed as tidal waves smashed into the city wall on all sides at once. They ran along the viaducts toward the city center where they would find protection from the storm. As water washed over the outermost ring of the city, buildings and people were swept into the first channel. The second wave was larger and more brutal than the first, crumbling the bridges over the spaces that permitted ingress from the ocean. Persephone reveled in the chaos she had created, but it was not enough. She imagined Hades' lips pressed against those of his mistress and her eyes rolled back into her head. When she focused again on the target of her rage, it was through a veil of red anger. The heaving and frothing of the water in the first channel intensified until it, too, was red, with the blood of those taken by the turbulent waves. The pummeling of the city wall continued relentlessly. It had broken in many places, and large gaps allowed the angry ocean to rush through. The viaducts over the first channel, not built to withstand such violent waves, were also falling into the water. Men, women, and children stood on the second ring and watched as water continued to surge over the city wall. Storms had never before damaged any structure on the second ring, but the city wall was no longer an effective breakwater. Would they be safe here? Persephone closed her eyes and thought of the moments of ecstasy Hades had shared with his mortal lover. The pounding of her heart quickened as the ocean crashed upon the isle.